Every morning at 5:30, he would appear, cap pulled low, eyes scanning the room before taking his corner booth. The regulars called him the Ghost and whispered that he was just another broken veteran. For 3 years, Maeve paid for his coffee without a word. She never asked his name. He never offered it. Then one day, he didn't show up. 3 days later, black SUVs lined the street. When the Admiral walked in, everything changed. What Maeve didn't know was that her simple act of kindness had been observed by the highest levels of military command. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories about unsung heroes, consider subscribing for more moments that remind us how a single gesture can change everything. Dawn breaks over Meridian Crossing as Maeve Calloway unlocks the front door of Hemlock Diner at precisely 4:47 a.m. The fluorescent lights flicker reluctantly to life, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The distinct smell of yesterday's grease and industrial cleaner hangs in the air, familiar and somehow comforting. 15 years of opening shifts have carved this routine into her bones. Each movement is precise, economical, the product of thousands of repetitions. She moves toward the ancient coffee machine first, running her hand absently over the dent in its side. A battle scar from 3 summers ago, when Davy Miller, the previous cook's 16-year-old son, had knocked it off the counter while attempting to impress a waitress who'd quit 2 weeks later. The machine had survived. Relationships at Hemlock Diner tended to be more fragile. Maeve fills the industrial coffee maker, the water tank gurgling as it warms. While it percolates, she systematically wipes down counters that were cleaned just hours before, her reflection distorted in the polished surface. At 37, her face shows the beginnings of lines around her eyes, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. Nothing flashy, nothing that draws attention. In Meridian Crossing, standing out rarely did anyone favors. The dining room requires little preparation. Tables wiped down, salt and pepper shakers refilled, menus arranged in their metal holders. The morning cook, Elias, won't arrive for another 30 minutes. Until then, the diner belongs solely to Maeve, these quiet moments before the day begins serving as a kind of meditation. The last part of her morning ritual is the most particular. From behind the counter, she selects a specific mug from the otherwise identical set. This one is slightly heavier than the others, with a hairline crack along the handle that somehow never worsens despite daily use. She runs her thumb over the imperfection, another scar with a story. This she places at the corner booth facing both entrances, turning it just so, the handle pointing at a precise angle toward the chair, ready and waiting. Outside, the town sleeps on. Meridian Crossing, population 4,382, sits nestled between rolling hills and a river that once powered the mill that gave the town its name. The mill closed 30 years ago when the timber industry collapsed. Now, the town survives on nostalgia, tourism, and the interstate exit that brings travelers to its handful of chain hotels. The downtown consists of a single main street lined with brick buildings from the 1920s, half of them empty, their windows covered with brown paper and faded for lease signs. Maeve glances at her watch. 20 minutes until he arrives. The first pink light of dawn creeps over the eastern hills, illuminating Main Street's empty sidewalks. A single car passes, probably Dr. Whitman heading to the medical center in the next county for his early rounds. The silence is profound, almost reverential. These moments, suspended between night and day, feel somehow separate from ordinary time. At precisely 5:30 a.m., the bell above the door chimes. Weston Albright enters, his weathered cap pulled low over eyes that scan the room before settling. He's tall but stooped now, his military posture betrayed only by how he squares his shoulders before sitting. Maeve wonders, not for the first time, what injuries or burdens cause that slight bend in his spine. His hands, she's noticed, bear the distinctive calluses of someone familiar with weapons, though she's never seen him carry one. Their interaction is minimal, a nod, a barely perceptible morning, and the coffee she brings without being asked. No menu required, no questions about specials or whether he slept well. Just coffee, black, in the waiting mug. The steam rises between them as he wraps long fingers around the mug. His hands shake slightly. They always do, until the first sip. Maeve has learned to turn away, giving him the privacy he seems to require for this daily ritual. When she returns to refill his cup, the trembling has stopped. "Will you have anything else today, sir?" she asks, the same question as every morning. He shakes his head just once. She nods in return and moves away to greet the next customer. By 6:15, the breakfast crowd begins to trickle in. First the shift workers from the packaging plant on the edge of town, then the retirees who gather to dissect yesterday's news, and finally the commuters grabbing coffee before the drive to jobs in larger towns. Weston remains in his corner, watching the room fill while nursing his single cup of coffee. The morning crowd has its regulars, Tom and Hank, retired mechanics who argue politics every day without ever changing each other's minds. Patricia, the elementary school principal who grades papers over her invariable order of wheat toast and fruit. Officer Delaney, stopping in for coffee and a breakfast sandwich before his patrol. Each has their preferences, their habits, their small eccentricities that Maeve has memorized over the years. "Still serving the ghost, I see," Sorrel Vega announces loudly from her foretop near the window. The morning, regulars snicker, a few glancing guiltily toward the corner booth. Sorrel owns the only real estate office in town and dresses the part, today in a blazer too formal for a diner breakfast. Hair arranged in a precision bob, gold jewelry catching the morning light. "Must be nice getting a prime booth for the price of black coffee." Maeve continues refilling sugar containers, her expression unchanged. The regulars have given Weston this nickname, the Ghost, partly for his silent presence, partly for how he seems to appear and disappear without anyone noticing his comings and goings. "Maybe he's waiting for his veteran's check," Sorrel continues, voice pitched to Carrie. "My cousin works at the VA, says half of them are just working the system." Maeve notices how Weston's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly at the words, though his expression remains impassive. She moves to his table, positioning herself between him and Sorrel's line of sight. "Warm up, sir?" she asks, though his cup is still half full. He nods, and she pours carefully, her back to Sorrel's table. Sorrel isn't alone in her disdain. Over the years, Maeve has heard the whispers, the speculation about the silent man in the corner. He's a drifter, he's mentally unstable, he's hiding from the law. The theories grow wilder with each telling, fueled by his silence and the town's hunger for novelty. When Weston leaves 30 minutes later, Maeve clears his table with the same attention she gives all her customers. What the others don't see is how she discreetly covers the cost of his coffee with bills from her tip jar before ringing up the sale. Landry had mentioned once 3 years ago when Weston first appeared that customers needed to buy something or move along. Since then, Maeve has made certain Weston's presence is technically profitable. "That man gives me the creeps," Dina, the newer waitress, says one morning as they watch him walk away. "He never says anything, just sits there watching everyone." "Some people prefer to listen," Maeve replies, wiping down the vacated table. "But he could be anyone," Dina insists. "We don't know anything about him." Maeve looks up. "We know he's punctual, we know he's neat, we know he respects other people's space. What else matters?" Dinah doesn't answer, but her expression suggests she finds these qualities insufficient. Days pass this way, then weeks, then months. Summer heat gives way to autumn chill. The trees along Main Street turn gold and crimson, their leaves skittering along the sidewalks in the October wind. Maeve notices the small details others miss. How Weston's hands, normally trembling slightly, steady completely when military vehicles pass outside. How he adjusts his position when certain customers enter. How he always leaves his area immaculate, mug turned upside down on the saucer. And then, the origami. The first time she found the precisely folded paper crane made from his napkin, she nearly threw it away. It sat under his upturned cup, a tiny sculpture of white paper. Only when she picked it up did she realize what it was. Wings extended, head tucked, each fold executed with mathematical precision. Curious, she'd kept it, tucking it into her apron pocket. The next day, his behavior unchanged. She wondered if he'd noticed her taking it. The following week, another crane appeared. Then another, appearing every few weeks without pattern or explanation. Now she keeps each one, a growing collection of silent thanks, 12 so far, arranged in chronological order in a drawer at home. She's studied them, looking for a message or meaning, but found only the perfect uniformity of their construction. Whoever Weston Albright is, whatever war or conflict left him silent and watchful, he has an artist's hands and an engineer's precision. Winter brings new challenges to Meridian Crossing. An early cold snap freezes pipes and downs power lines. The school closes for 3 days, cars slide off icy roads. The diner's ancient heating system fails during the coldest week of the year. While Landry Chamberlain, the owner, arranges for repairs, the dining room remains frigid. "Sorry about the temperature," Maeve tells customers as she serves coffee. "Repairman can't get here until Thursday." Most people keep their coats on, drinking their coffee quickly before it cools. Business drops off sharply as people opt for the chain restaurants near the interstate with their reliable central heating. On the second morning of the breakdown, Maeve arrives carrying her personal space heater from home. The small appliance barely makes a dent in the overall chill, but she positions it near Weston's booth, angling it to provide warmth without drawing attention. When he arrives, she sees his eyes flick to the heater, then to her. The faintest nod acknowledges her gesture. "You're wasting electricity on him," Landry remarks later, counting the register. He's a pragmatic businessman in his 50s, neither cruel nor particularly kind. The diner is his retirement plan, not his passion. His thinning hair is always carefully combed over, his button-down shirts ironed but increasingly threadbare at the cuffs. He spends $3 a day here, maximum. "He's a customer same as anyone," Maeve responds, wiping down the coffee machine. Landry's expression softens momentarily. "Diner's not doing great, Maeve. We might need to implement minimum purchases soon. Just prepare yourself." She nods, understanding the implication. The diner, like much of downtown Meridian Crossing, operates on increasingly thin margins. The chain restaurants by the interstate exit have siphoned off much of the tourist traffic, leaving Main Street businesses dependent on locals whose own finances are often strained. That evening, walking home in the early darkness of winter, Maeve passes the town hall where a meeting is underway. Through the windows, she sees the council gathered around blueprints spread across tables. Sorrel stands at the podium, gesturing emphatically at a projection labeled Downtown Revitalization. "We need to address certain elements that drive away legitimate business," Sorrel's voice carries through the partially opened window. "People want to feel safe and comfortable spending their money." Several council members nod. Mayor Reynolds, who owns the pharmacy 2 blocks from the diner, leans forward with interest. Councilwoman Patel frowns, making a note on her legal pad. "The beautification committee proposes removing the bench outside the diner," Sorrel continues. "It's become a gathering spot for undesirables." Maeve pauses, watching a moment longer. The undesirables in question are primarily the 3 elderly men who meet there daily to play chess, occasionally joined by high school students waiting for rides home. The bench has stood in that spot for 40 years, donated by the Rotary Club when Main Street was last renovated. She continues home, troubled by the implications. Her apartment sits above the former hardware store, a studio with sloping floors and windows that rattle in the wind. The rent is reasonable, the location convenient. She's made it comfortable over the years with secondhand furniture and plants that thrive despite the northern exposure. That night, she takes out the collection of paper cranes, arranging them in a row on her kitchen table. 12 identical figures, each a testament to patience and precision. She studies them, wondering again about the man who creates them. What makes someone fold paper so meticulously? What story lies behind his silence? The next morning, a military recruitment billboard appears on the highway entering town. "America's elite forces need you," it proclaims over the silhouette of a soldier. Local news mentions increased special operations training in the nearby mountain range. The Meridian Crossing Gazette runs a small feature on the town's forgotten military contributions during past conflicts. At the diner, conversation centers on these developments. "My nephew's thinking of enlisting," Patricia tells the table of teachers. "Says the signing bonus would pay for college afterward." "Smart move," Officer Delaney comments from the counter. "Military gave me discipline, purpose, best thing I ever did." "Not everyone comes back the same," counters Tom quietly. "My brother went to Vietnam whole and came back in pieces. Not just his leg, but his mind." The conversation shifts uncomfortably, no one quite sure how to respond. Maeve refills coffees, keeping one eye on Weston's corner. He studies the paper's military article longer than usual. His eyes move methodically across the text, his coffee growing cold beside him. "Anything else I can get you?" she asks, coffee pot in hand. He looks up, and for a moment, something different flickers in his expression. No, thank you. This is enough. 4 words, the most he's spoken in a single day. As January turns to February, the diner's financial troubles become common knowledge. Landry spends more time in his office with the door closed, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. The cook is sent home early on slow afternoons. Supplies are ordered in smaller quantities. Menu items disappear without explanation. First the more expensive cuts of meat, then certain imported ingredients. They'll need to attract a better class of customer if they want to stay open, Sorrel tells anyone who will listen. Her gaze invariably drifts to Weston's corner. Some people just bring down the whole atmosphere. Maeve overhears this while delivering plates to a nearby table, but says nothing. The comment isn't worth dignifying with a response, and confrontation has never been her style. She prefers action to words, the quiet filling of a coffee cup, the discreet payment from her tips, the space heater positioned for maximum effect with minimum notice. February brings heavy snow, transforming Meridian Crossing into a monochrome landscape of white streets and gray skies. Business slows further as people venture out less frequently. Maeve's morning walk to the diner becomes a careful navigation of unshoveled sidewalks and treacherous corners. Despite the weather, Weston appears each morning at precisely 5:30, his boots leaving distinct tracks in the fresh snow, his coat dusted with white. He never wears a scarf or gloves, despite the bitter cold. His routine remains unchanged. 1 cup of coffee, silent observation, a nod of thanks when he leaves. Maeve arrives early as always on a Tuesday morning, preparing Weston's corner. She glances repeatedly at the clock as 5:30 comes and goes. By 6:15, his absence is conspicuous. By 7:30, she's checked the street a dozen times, watching for his familiar figure through the frost-etched windows. "Your ghost get exercised?" Sorrel asks, eyebrow raised over her menu. Maeve doesn't respond, but her eyes drift to the black government SUV that's been parked across the street for the past 20 minutes. A man in sunglasses sits inside, watching the diner. When he notices her attention, he starts the engine and drives away. The absence feels significant, worrying. In 3 years, Weston has never missed a day without advance notice. Once, during a blizzard that closed most businesses, he'd still appeared, covered in snow, but precisely on time. Once, when visibly ill with what must have been the flu, he'd still taken his place in the corner booth, though he'd barely touched his coffee. The day passes with no sign of him. Maeve tells herself this means nothing. Everyone misses a day occasionally. Even habits as fixed as his can be interrupted by a common cold or a doctor's appointment. Yet, as she wipes down his untouched booth at closing time, her cloth brushes against something. The origami crane from yesterday sits tucked against the wall. She hadn't noticed it before, hadn't seen him leave it. Something about this one is different. It's folded more intricately, with a small bulge in the center, as though something is written inside. She pockets it quickly, unable to bring herself to unfold what might be Weston's final message. The weight of it seems disproportionate to its size, as though it contains more than just paper. 3 days pass without Weston's appearance. The corner booth sits empty each morning, though Maeve continues placing the mug as if expecting him any minute. Each day she checks the street more frequently, hoping to see his familiar figure approaching through the snow. On the 4th day, Landry suggests she stop the ritual. "Probably moved on," he says with feigned casualness, refilling sugar packets behind the counter. "These types do that sometimes." "These types?" Maeve questions, an edge in her normally even voice. "You know what I mean. Drifters, no roots." But Weston had been coming daily for 3 years, hardly the pattern of a drifter. Something about his absence feels deliberate, planned. Maeve begins asking subtle questions around town. The bartender at the VFW hall shrugs when she mentions Weston. The pharmacist remembers filling prescriptions, but nothing specific. The librarian recalls him using reference materials, but never checking anything out. Nobody knows where he lives, or anything substantial about him. It's as though Weston Albright exists only in the corner booth of Hemlock Diner. After work, Maeve walks past the park where homeless individuals sometimes gather in warmer months. No one has seen Weston. She checks the small motel at the edge of town, but the clerk claims not to recognize his description. The bus station attendant remembers him boarding the eastbound bus occasionally, but can't recall when he last saw him. Strangely, business at the diner improves in his absence. The corner booth now hosts young families, traveling salespeople, teenagers lingering over French fries. Landry seems cautiously optimistic about the month's numbers. "See," Sorrel says one morning, gesturing to the now occupied space where a family with 3 children devours pancakes. "This is what paying customers look like." Maeve continues her routine regardless. Each morning, she still places the mug in Weston's spot before opening. Each night, she checks the booth carefully for any sign of his return. The gesture feels increasingly like a prayer or superstition, but she can't bring herself to abandon it. That evening, searching through the local newspaper archives at the library, she finds a brief mention from 12 years ago. Commander Albright receives classified commendation for service to national security. The grainy photo might be Weston, though the man stands straighter, his expression obscured by poor print quality. The article provides no details about the commendation or Albright's specific service. Walking home along Main Street, she notices 2 military-aged men outside the hardware store watching her with unusual interest. They wear civilian clothes, jeans, work boots, flannel, shirts, but something about their posture and haircuts suggests recent service. When she turns to look directly at them, they immediately begin a loud conversation about fishing lures. But as she passes, their eyes follow her progress down the street. Reaching her apartment, Maeve double-checks the locks, something she rarely bothers with in Meridian Crossing. She sits at her kitchen table, staring at the collection of paper cranes. The newest one, still folded, sits apart from the others, its secrets intact. The next day brings new strangeness. Landry receives an official-looking letter delivered by courier rather than regular mail. His hands tremble slightly as he reads it in his office, and when Maeve asks about it later, he changes the subject. "Just tax stuff," he says, though tax notices don't usually arrive in unmarked envelopes hand-delivered by men in dark suits. While cleaning Weston's booth that evening, she notices something she'd overlooked, a small scratch mark under the table that resembles military coordinates. She traces them with her finger, brow furrowed in concentration. "You know your latitude and longitude pretty well for a waitress," remarks a customer who's been watching her. He's new, she's never seen him before, with a military haircut poorly disguised by a baseball cap. Maeve straightens immediately. "My father was Navy, taught me a few things." The man nods, seemingly satisfied with this explanation, though his eyes remain evaluative. He leaves a large tip and doesn't return. Later that week, the news mentions the declassification of a special operation from decades ago, something called Operation Kingfisher. Maeve freezes while watching, a flash of recognition crossing her face. That night, she opens a locked box kept under her bed, carefully examining its contents before returning it to its hiding place. An emergency town council meeting is called. Maeve attends, standing at the back of the room, as Landry announces the diner will likely close within 30 days due to financial difficulties. The room buzzes with concern. The diner has been a Meridian Crossing institution for generations. "Part of the problem is our image," Sorrel interjects, standing without being recognized. "The Downtown Beautification Committee has accelerated our plans to remove certain eyesores, including the bench across from the diner where undesirables often loiter." "You mean where people wait for the bus?" Maeve challenges from the back row. Heads turn. Maeve rarely speaks at these meetings, rarely attends them at all. Her voice, though quiet, carries in the sudden silence. "People with cars don't need to loiter," Sorrel retorts. "We're trying to attract a better class of visitor." The tension in the room shifts as people take sides. Some nod with Sorrel, others murmur in disagreement. The mayor attempts to redirect the conversation to financial solutions, but the division has been exposed. As the meeting ends, Maeve notices several unfamiliar men standing along the walls, observing rather than participating. They wear civilian clothes but carry themselves with military bearing, backs straight, eyes constantly scanning, positions carefully chosen for maximum visibility. The following days bring more unexplained changes. More government vehicles appear in town, black SUVs with tinted windows, unmarked sedans with government plates. Men in civilian clothes but military haircuts ask questions at local businesses. A helicopter flies unusually low over Main Street, circling twice before disappearing over the mountain range. Maeve watches it all with growing certainty that something significant is happening, something connected to Weston's disappearance and perhaps to her father's past. The coordinates under the table, the news about Operation Kingfisher, the surveillance that seems increasingly focused on her movements. That night in her small apartment, She finally unfolds the origami crane. Inside, in precise block lettering, are the words, Protocol Omega Initiated. Below this is a phone number with an area code she doesn't recognize. Her hands shaking slightly, she dials. After 3 rings, a mechanical voice answers. Verification required. Maeve hesitates only briefly before responding. Albatross Sunrise, authentication Sierra 9. Silence follows her words, stretching long enough that she wonders if the connection has been lost. Then the voice returns, softer now, human rather than mechanical. Stay at the diner tomorrow, all day. The line goes dead as the evening news begins on her small television. The Department of Defense announced today the passing of a distinguished military figure whose identity remains classified. A statement from the Pentagon called the individual instrumental to the nation's security for over 4 decades. Maeve stares at the screen, her expression unreadable. Then, methodically, she begins to prepare. From the locked box under her bed, she removes several items, a faded photograph, a small metal object that might be a medallion or badge, and a letter yellowed with age. These she places in her apron pocket where the paper crane had been. Tomorrow, she suspects, everything will change. Maeve arrives at the diner an hour earlier than usual, the sky still black over Meridian Crossing. The streets lie empty beneath a thin layer of fresh snow, her footprints the only disruption in the pristine surface. Her breath forms clouds in the cold February air as she unlocks the door and steps into the dark interior, the familiar smell of coffee grounds and cleaning solution greeting her. She stands motionless for a moment after closing the door, listening to the building settle around her. The refrigerators hum in the kitchen. Water drips somewhere in the back. The old heating system clicks as it struggles to life. These sounds, once merely background to her routine, now feel significant, markers of normalcy before whatever comes next. Moving with deliberate calm, Maeve begins preparing everything as normal. She starts the coffee, checks supplies, wipes down counters that were cleaned just hours before. Each motion is precise, measured, a counterpoint to the uncertainty churning inside her. The familiar tasks anchor her to the present moment, keeping anxiety at bay. When she reaches Weston's booth, she pauses. Today she places not 1, but 2 mugs on the table, positioning the second across from where he would sit. The empty seat faces the door, waiting. It's a small gesture of defiance against his absence, or perhaps a signal to whoever might be watching. She's not sure which, only that it feels necessary. By 6 a.m., with the first weak light breaking over the eastern hills, Landry arrives. He stops short when he sees Maeve already working, the dining room fully prepared. "You're early," he observes, unwinding his scarf. "Couldn't sleep," she replies, not elaborating. Landry studies her, noting the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she avoids his gaze. "Something going on I should know about?" "Just a feeling," she says, refilling salt shakers with mechanical precision. He doesn't press further, disappearing into his office with a concerned glance back at her. The morning proceeds with surface normality. Elias arrives to work the grill. The first customers trickle in for coffee and breakfast. The regular rhythm of orders and service establishes itself. By mid-morning, the diner is unusually full. Word has spread about military vehicles gathering at the town limits. Cellular service has mysteriously failed. Phones show full signal, but calls drop immediately. And internet connections are spotty at best. Curious locals crowd the windows, watching the road and speculating about what's happening. "Any idea what's going on?" asks Darlene from the bakery, sliding onto a counter stool and blowing on her hands to warm them. Maeve shakes her head, refilling coffee mugs with practiced efficiency. Her face reveals nothing, but her eyes constantly return to the corner booth, where 2 empty mugs wait, conspicuous in their symmetry. "Probably just a training exercise," suggests Marv, the hardware store owner, joining the conversation. His flannel jacket still carries the scent of sawdust from his shop. "They've been doing more of those in the mountains lately. My cousin's boy is a ranger, says they're ramping up some new program." "Training exercises don't cut phone service," counters Darlene, attempting to check her phone again with no success. "And what about those men going door to door at the businesses yesterday? They weren't asking about training." The conversation bounces around the diner, theories about terrorism drills, rumors about visiting dignitaries, speculation about military equipment testing gone wrong. Some suggest it's related to the new research facility in the next county. Others insist it must be connected to the strange lights seen over the mountain range last month. Maeve moves between tables, silent and attentive, aware of Landry watching her from behind the counter. His eyes follow her with growing suspicion, noting how she positions herself to maintain a clear view of both entrances at all times. The surveillance isn't lost on her. She can feel the weight of his gaze between her shoulder blades. "You know something, don't you?" he asks quietly while she restocks napkins at the service station, his voice barely audible above the diner's chatter. She meets his gaze evenly. "You got that letter 3 days ago. You know something too." He nods almost imperceptibly, glancing around to ensure no one is listening. The gesture confirms her suspicions. "They asked me to stay open today no matter what. Said it was a matter of national respect." "Who asked?" "Man in a suit. Showed credentials I've never seen before." Landry straightens a stack of menus nervously, his fingers lingering on the worn edges. "Said they'd cover any losses. Told me not to worry about the closure announcement I made." The revelation slots into place alongside her other observations: the government vehicles, the surveillance, the increased military presence. Something orchestrated is happening, something that has been in motion since before Weston's disappearance. Outside, more vehicles arrive, black SUVs with government plates, followed by 2 large transport trucks with canvas-covered beds. The military presence is no longer subtle. Men in tactical gear establish a perimeter, blocking side streets and redirecting civilian traffic away from the main road. The diner falls silent as customers abandon their conversations to watch the activity through frosted windows. "Are we safe here?" someone whispers, voicing the collective anxiety. "If we weren't, they'd evacuate us," Maeve answers, her voice calm and reasonable. The response comes automatically, though she has no way of knowing if it's true. Still, her certainty seems to reassure those nearby. Sorrel Vega pushes through the door in a flurry of cold air and expensive perfume, breathless with excitement. Her tailored wool coat and leather gloves mark her as distinctly out of place among the diner's working-class patrons. "They've blocked off the whole downtown. Mayor's furious. They wouldn't tell him anything." Her eyes scan the packed diner before landing on Maeve. "Seems your ghost left quite an impression before disappearing." The comment draws uncomfortable laughter from some customers, but most remain focused on the activity outside. Before Maeve can respond, a sharp knock comes at the door. A uniformed military police officer enters, scanning the room before approaching Landry, who has emerged from the kitchen at the commotion. "Sir, by order of the Department of Defense, we're securing this location for the next 2 hours. Everyone may remain inside, but no one enters or leaves without clearance." He hands Landry an official-looking document, the government seal, visible even from where Maeve stands. "We apologize for the inconvenience." Questions erupt from the customers, the collective anxiety finding voice. Is there a threat? Is this related to the training exercises? Should they be worried? The officer remains professionally detached, his expression revealing nothing. "I'm not authorized to provide further information. Please continue your normal activities. This is not an emergency situation." As the officer leaves, the chatter resumes at twice the volume. Theories grow wilder: government conspiracies, secret weapon tests, alien encounters. Through it all, Maeve works steadily, refilling coffee, serving food, cleaning tables. Only the slight tension in her shoulders betrays her awareness that something momentous approaches. The minutes tick by with excruciating slowness. Customers who initially planned quick stops find themselves lingering, unwilling to miss whatever might happen next. Landry moves through the crowded space, reassuring people, though his own uncertainty is visible in his frequent glances at the door. At precisely noon, the road outside is suddenly blocked by a new convoy, 3 armored vehicles followed by a car bearing flags that indicate high-ranking officers. The diner falls silent as communications officers set up equipment on the sidewalk. Military police form a corridor from the vehicles to the diner entrance. "Is that?" one customer whispers, pointing to the flags. "Stars on the flags," another confirms, voice hushed with awe. "That's Admiral level." The convoy stops directly in front of the diner. The door of the center vehicle opens, and Admiral Quinlan Blackwood emerges in full dress uniform, his chest heavy with decorations that catch the winter sunlight. He stands for a moment on the street, surveying the building before climbing the 3 steps to the entrance. The bell chimes as he enters, followed by 6 officers of varying ranks, all in formal dress. Their immaculate uniforms stand in sharp contrast to the diner's worn interior. The Admiral scans the room, his gaze moving methodically over the curious faces, before finally settling on the empty corner booth with its 2 waiting mugs. Without hesitation, he approaches Maeve, who stands straight-backed near the counter. The diner has gone completely still, the only sound the soft hiss of the grill and the ticking of the wall clock. "Ms. Calloway?" he asks, his voice carrying in the silent room. "Yes, sir," she responds, her tone measured and respectful. Years of careful neutrality serve her well in this moment, masking the storm of questions behind her composed exterior. Admiral Blackwood stands at attention, his posture impeccable despite his age. Silver hair and weathered features suggest decades of service, but his eyes remain sharp, evaluative. Captain Weston Albright passed away Tuesday evening at 21:43 hours. Before his death, he requested that I personally deliver this message to you and to this establishment. A collective intake of breath moves through the room. Maeve's suspicions about Weston's absence are confirmed in the worst possible way. Yet she maintains her composure, only a slight paling of her complexion betraying the impact of the news. The diner remains absolutely still as the Admiral speaks, his voice professional but carrying undeniable emotion. Captain Albright was not just a veteran. He commanded the most classified special operations unit in American military history. Every tactic we teach today at the Naval Special Warfare Command began with him. His operations remain largely classified, but I am authorized to tell you they saved thousands of American lives and prevented at least 3 events that would have changed the course of our nation. A murmur ripples through the diner. Sorrel's face has drained of color. Landry stands frozen behind the counter, coffee pot suspended mid-pour. For the past 3 years, the Admiral continues, we've maintained surveillance on this location at Captain Albright's request. He chose this place, this specific booth, for reasons he shared with me only in his final hours. The Admiral reaches up and, in a move that breaks every rule of military protocol, removes his gold seal trident from his uniform. The pin catches the light, gleaming against his palm. With precise movements, he places it on Weston's table. In 40 years of distinguished service, Captain Albright told me that your quiet respect, Ms. Calloway, was the only recognition he ever wanted. Each day you honored him without knowing who he was or what he'd done. He called it the purest form of respect he'd ever received. Maeve's composure wavers for just a moment before she reaches into her apron pocket and removes a small wooden box. The action seems to surprise the Admiral, a brief flicker crossing his disciplined features. "He knew I would be here today," she says, her voice soft but steady. Opening the box, she reveals a faded photograph. A much younger Weston standing beside a man in naval uniform who bears a striking resemblance to Maeve. Both men stand before a helicopter, desert landscape visible in the background. "Lieutenant Commander James Calloway," the Admiral identifies, recognition immediate. "Operation Kingfisher, 1986. "My father," Maeve confirms. "He died when I was 12. Official report said training accident." Admiral Blackwood nods, his expression softening slightly. "Captain Albright pulled your father from a burning building after an operation went sideways. Your father saved 19 hostages before the extraction. Captain Albright never forgot that." He glances around the diner before continuing. "When you needed work 15 years ago, he made sure Landry hired you." Landry's eyes widen with sudden understanding. "The investment group? That was him all along?" The Admiral nods. "Captain Albright purchased this building 13 years ago through a shell corporation. His only instruction was that the corner booth remain available and that Ms. Calloway's employment be secured." The revelation lands like a physical force in the room. Customers exchange glances, processing the implications. The quiet veteran in the corner booth hadn't been just another anonymous drifter. He had been the owner, watching silently as the town judged him, without knowing his identity or importance. Every military officer present turns toward the booth and executes a formal salute. Sorrel steps forward, her usual confidence gone. Her designer clothes and jewelry, so often wielded as markers of superiority, now seem merely superficial in the face of genuine significance. "We didn't know. How could we have known?" That was precisely the point, the Admiral replies. Captain Albright believed true character is revealed in how people treat those they believe can offer them nothing in return. The words hang in the air, a judgment more powerful for its restraint. Sorrel retreats a step, for once without a ready response. As the Admiral speaks, Maeve stands perfectly still, absorbing words that transform 3 years of quiet interactions into something profoundly different. The corner booth, the daily coffee, the paper cranes, all of it reconfigured by this new knowledge. Memory after memory shifts in her mind, ordinary moments now illuminated with new meaning. She thinks of the space heater she'd brought from home, the way she'd intercepted Sorrel's louder comments, the origami cranes she'd collected, simple gestures of basic decency that apparently meant more than she could have imagined. Captain Albright left specific instructions for what is to happen now, Admiral Blackwood continues. With your permission, Ms. Calloway, I'd like to discuss those privately. The diner erupts in whispered conversations as Maeve follows the Admiral to a quiet corner. Their discussion is brief but intense, with Maeve nodding occasionally, her expression growing more resolved with each passing moment. Though their voices are too low to be overheard, their body language suggests weighty matters being decided. When they return to the center of the diner, the Admiral addresses everyone present. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1 hour, a formal memorial service will take place across the street in Meridian Park. Captain Albright's wishes were that this community, a place he chose for his final years, would be invited to honor him alongside his military colleagues. All are welcome to attend. With that, the Admiral and his entourage exit the diner, leaving a wake of stunned silence that quickly dissolves into chaotic conversation. Customers rush to call family members, to spread the news, to process what they've witnessed. Through it all, Maeve continues her work, clearing tables, refilling coffee cups, answering questions with calm precision. But now, there's a subtle difference in how people look at her, how they speak to her. The invisible woman who poured their coffee has suddenly become visible in an entirely new way. "Did you know?" Dina asks, voice hushed as they work side by side behind the counter. "About Captain Albright? About him owning this place?" Maeve shakes her head. "I knew he was more than he seemed, but not this." "And your father? Did you know about that connection?" "I knew my father served with someone named Albright. I didn't know it was him until recently." She doesn't elaborate on how or when this realization occurred. Sorrel approaches cautiously as Maeve wipes down the counter, her usual imperious manner subdued. "Maeve, I want to apologize for what I said about him. If I'd known—" "That's exactly why you should be apologizing," Maeve interrupts, her voice low but firm. "You shouldn't need to know someone's credentials to treat them with basic dignity." Sorrel steps back, stung by the rebuke, but unable to argue with its truth. For perhaps the first time in their long acquaintance, she has nothing to say. As the hour approaches, the diner slowly empties as customers make their way to the park. Maeve remains behind, methodically cleaning Weston's booth one last time. Her movements are reverent, almost ritualistic, as she wipes down the surface where he sat every day for 3 years. Landry approaches, fidgeting with his apron. His entire demeanor has shifted. The pragmatic businessman, now uncertain in this new reality, where his business has been secured by forces beyond his control. "The Admiral told me everything," he says quietly. "About the investment, about Albright's instructions all these years." He shakes his head in wonder. "For 3 years, I've been getting mysterious payments to keep this place running, all because of some promise Albright made to your father." "He didn't want anyone to know," Maeve replies, still focused on her task. "But why? Why hide who he was? Why sit in the corner for 3 years saying next to nothing?" Maeve runs her hand over the table's surface, the same motion she's performed thousands of times before. Some men spend their whole lives being important. Maybe he wanted to know what it felt like to just be. The simplicity of this explanation seems to satisfy Landry. He nods, contemplating a man who chose anonymity when he could have commanded respect with a single revelation. Across the street, military personnel have transformed the small park into a dignified memorial setting. Chairs are arranged in neat rows, some already occupied despite the cold. A podium bearing the seal of the Department of Defense stands at the center. Honor guards take position at each corner of the area, standing motionless despite the falling snow. Maeve watches from the diner window as Meridian Crossing assembles. Everyone from the mayor to school children, merchants to farmers, all gathering to honor a man they'd barely noticed in life. The irony isn't lost on her. 3 years of indifference or outright disdain, erased by the revelation of status and importance. She remains inside until the crowd has settled, until the ceremony is about to begin. Then, bundling into her coat, she crosses the street. The crowd parts for her, murmurs following in her wake. The Admiral gestures to a reserved seat in the front row, directly before the podium. As she sits, she notices something on the chair beside hers, a perfectly folded paper crane. The memorial service is both formal and deeply personal. Military speakers recount Captain Albright's distinguished service, though many specifics remain classified. They speak of his innovation in tactics, his leadership during critical missions, his unwavering commitment to those who served under him. Former team members share carefully worded anecdotes about operations in places whose names stir distant memories of news headlines: Beirut, Grenada, Panama, Kuwait, Somalia. Through their stories, a portrait emerges of a man whose primary concern was always the safety of his team and the civilians they encountered. He never left anyone behind, one graying former SEAL testifies. Not enemy, not civilian, certainly not his own. If you were breathing, Albright made sure you got out. Then, in a break from traditional protocol, the Admiral invites Maeve to speak. The request catches her off guard. Public speaking has never been her strength. She approaches the podium slowly, aware of hundreds of eyes upon her. For a moment, she stands in silence, gathering her thoughts. "I didn't know Captain Albright," she begins, her voice stronger than she expected. "I knew Weston. For 3 years I poured his coffee each morning. We exchanged perhaps 50 words in all that time. But I recognized something in him that many of us failed to see. A dignity that had nothing to do with rank or accomplishment." She pauses, looking out over the gathered community, faces both familiar and strange. "He taught me that true respect isn't earned through status. It's given freely, without expectation." Each morning, he sat in that corner, not as a decorated officer, but as a human being seeking a moment of peace. And in honoring that simple wish, I apparently honored everything he stood for. Her words, unadorned but heartfelt, resonate through the park. Several veterans in attendance nod in recognition. Sorrel studies her hands, unable to meet Maeve's gaze. As Maeve returns to her seat, a military band plays a solemn tribute. The ceremony concludes with a traditional rifle salute and the presentation of a folded flag to Maeve, who accepts it with visible surprise. The gesture seems to formalize her role as Weston's designated mourner, though their relationship defies easy categorization. Afterward, as the crowd disperses, Admiral Blackwood approaches her again. Snow has begun to fall more heavily, coating his uniform with a fine white dust. "There's one more matter to address, Miss Calloway. Captain Albright left specific instructions regarding his estate." He hands her an envelope bearing an official seal. His will is quite clear. The building housing Hemlock Diner, which he purchased years ago, is now transferred to your ownership. Additionally, he established a trust fund to ensure its continued operation. Maeve stares at the envelope, the implications overwhelming. "I don't understand. Why would he do this?" "Captain Albright believed in recognizing genuine character," the Admiral explains. "He spent his career evaluating people under pressure, making split-second judgments about who could be trusted. In his final years, he found something rare in this place, and in you particularly: authenticity without agenda. The inheritance transforms her life in an instant, from employee to owner, from renter to property holder, from observer to guardian of a legacy. The responsibility settles on her shoulders, heavy but somehow right. As the military contingent prepares to depart, a young officer approaches Maeve hesitantly. Lieutenant Ramirez, according to his nameplate, seems barely old enough to shave, though his eyes carry the weight of someone who has seen combat. "Ms. Calloway, Captain Albright left this for you as well." He hands her a small wooden box, similar to the one she had shown earlier, but older, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. He asks that it be delivered after the service. Inside is a collection of paper cranes, dozens of them, far more than the few she had received. Each is dated and labeled with a location: Kabul, Belgrade, Damascus, Mogadishu. Places from news headlines, conflict zones, secret operations. He made one after every mission, Lieutenant Ramirez explains, his voice softening. Said it helped him remember what he was fighting for. Said folding paper with blood-stained hands reminded him that creation matters more than destruction. Maeve runs her fingers over the delicate paper sculptures, each one representing lives saved or lost, decisions made under unimaginable pressure. Why give these to me? He said you'd understand their value, the young officer replies, that you'd know what to do with them when the time came. The cryptic answer raises more questions than it answers, but Maeve nods, accepting the responsibility without fully understanding it. That evening, after the crowds have gone and the military presence has withdrawn from Meridian Crossing, Maeve returns to the empty diner. The day's events have transformed the space. What was once just a struggling business now feels like a monument to something profound yet difficult to articulate. Landry sits at the counter reviewing paperwork. He looks up as Maeve enters, snowflakes melting in her hair. So, I guess you're my boss now. I guess so, she replies, the reality still settling in. The Admiral explained everything, about the purchase, about Albright's instructions all these years. He shakes his head in wonder. For 3 years, I've been getting mysterious payments to keep this place running, all because of some promise Albright made to your father. Maeve sits beside him, examining the papers. Property deeds, trust documents, operating instructions. The legal language confirms what still seems impossible. She owns not just the diner, but the entire building. The trust established in her name ensures financial stability for years to come. It wasn't just about a promise, she says, considering the motivations of a man she thought she knew, but clearly didn't. It was about creating a place where he could just exist, without his rank or his history following him. Well, the whole town knows now, Landry observes, gesturing toward the window, where occasional pedestrians still peer in curiously. Everything's going to change. Yes, Maeve agrees, looking around the diner with new eyes. But we get to decide how. Over the following weeks, Meridian Crossing buzzes with the story of Captain Weston Albright and the waitress who unknowingly honored him. National news outlets attempt to cover the story, but with so much of Albright's service classified, they must content themselves with vague references to distinguished service and national security contributions. The diner experiences an immediate surge in business. Curious visitors, military veterans, even officials from nearby bases. People want to sit in the corner booth to see where the legendary officer spent his final years. Some come seeking details Maeve can't provide. Others come simply to pay respects to a man they never knew. Sorrel leads the Downtown Revitalization Committee in a completely new direction, focusing on honoring the town's military connections rather than erasing its working-class character. The bench across from the diner remains, now designated a memorial site. The beautification plans shift from cosmetic improvements to substantive support for local businesses. Maeve, now owner of what everyone has begun calling Albright's Corner, maintains most of the diner's traditional operations. The menu stays simple, the price is reasonable, the atmosphere welcoming to all. But she makes one significant change. The corner booth is reserved exclusively for active military personnel, their coffee always complimentary. 1 month after the memorial service, a package arrives for Maeve. The return address is the Pentagon, the envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside is a sealed letter from Captain Albright himself, written shortly before his death and entrusted to the Admiral with instructions for delayed delivery. She waits until closing to read it, needing privacy for what feels like a final conversation. The diner empty, lights dimmed except for the one above the corner booth. She sits where he always sat and carefully opens the envelope. The letter, written in the same precise hand that marked the paper cranes, fills 3 pages. Ms. Calloway, if you're reading this, you now know who I was, but more importantly, you've shown me who you are. When I first came to Meridian Crossing, I was seeking anonymity, a place where my name carried no weight, where my actions rather than my reputation would define me. I chose your diner by chance. I returned by choice. For 3 years, I watched you treat everyone, from the mayor to the homeless man on the bench, with the same quiet dignity. You paid for my coffee from your tips because Landry insisted every seat generate revenue. You noticed when my hands shook and thoughtfully delayed your approach until the tremors passed. You brought your own heater when the buildings failed, positioning it near my table without drawing attention. These small kindnesses might seem insignificant to some. In my experience, they reveal more about a person's character than grand gestures ever could. Your father saved 19 hostages in Operation Kingfisher, including 3 children. When the extraction went wrong, he returned to a burning building, knowing he likely wouldn't emerge. He did it without orders, without hesitation. When I pulled him out, severely injured, his only question was whether the children were safe. You have his integrity, his sense of duty to others above self. The diner is yours now. The corner booth has a purpose beyond what you currently understand. Continue what you've begun, and trust that it matters more than you know. With respect and gratitude, Captain W. Albright. Maeve folds the letter carefully and places it in her pocket. She sits for a long while in the empty diner, in the corner booth where a ghost once sat, contemplating what comes next. The letter answers some questions but raises others. What purpose does the corner booth serve beyond memory? What did he mean by continuing what she'd begun? The following morning, she arrives at 4:47 a.m. as always. The routine remains unchanged, coffee prepared, counters cleaned, menus arranged. When she reaches for the mug to place in the corner booth, she hesitates briefly before selecting 2 instead of 1. As she positions them on the table, the bell above the door chimes. Maeve turns, surprised by the early visitor. No one usually arrives this early, not even the regulars who've been coming for years. A young woman in a naval uniform stands in the doorway, her posture military precise despite obvious exhaustion. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggest days without proper sleep. Her uniform bears the insignia of Naval Intelligence. We're not open yet, Maeve says automatically, though something about the visitor suggests this isn't a casual breakfast stop. The woman looks directly at the corner booth, then back to Maeve. Captain Albright said this would be the place to find answers. Maeve's hand tightens around the coffee pot she's holding. Answers to what? The naval officer approaches slowly, her expression guarded but determined. Operation Stillwater. He was the last living person who knew what really happened. She places a small object on the counter, a paper crane precisely folded. He said you would have received instructions by now. Maeve stares at the crane, identical to those Weston had left. I don't know anything about any operation. With respect, Ms. Calloway, I think you do. The officer nods toward Maeve's pocket, where Albright's letter creates a visible outline. The Admiral mentioned you might be reluctant, said to tell you Albatross Sunrise. The authentication code from the phone call. Maeve's expression changes subtly as pieces click into place. The coordinates scratched under the table, the mysterious surveillance, the paper cranes with their hidden messages. What exactly did Captain Albright tell you about me? She asks carefully, buying time to think. That you were not just a waitress, the officer replies. That some people pour coffee while carrying the weight of classified information. That sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones who know the most dangerous truths. Outside, the sky lightens with approaching dawn. Meridian Crossing will soon awaken to another day, unaware of the conversation taking place in the corner booth of what was once Hemlock Diner. Maeve considers the officer before her, weighing decisions that will irrevocably change her carefully constructed life. The simplicity she's valued for so long, the predictable routine, the clear boundaries, the quiet anonymity, seems to be slipping away with each revelation about Weston's legacy. Then, with deliberate movements, she locks the diner door, turns the sign to closed, and returns to the booth. Captain Albright left more than just property, she says quietly. He left a network and a mission. She removes from her pocket the wooden box containing the paper cranes, spreading them on the table between them. These aren't just mementos, they're a code. Each one contains coordinates, dates, names. The officer leans forward, eyes widening as understanding dawns. The missing intelligence files. Exactly, Maeve confirms. For 40 years, Captain Albright documented operations that never made it into official records. Operations that certain people would prefer remain buried forever. She turns over one of the cranes, revealing a small symbol inked on its underside. Including Operation Stillwater. Then you'll help us? The officer asks, hope evident in her voice. Maeve gazes at the corner booth, where for 3 years a silent veteran had sat, watching the world with careful eyes. where now perhaps something new is beginning. Albright chose me for a reason, she says finally. I won't ignore that responsibility. As they talk, another black SUV pulls up outside the diner. Admiral Blackwood emerges, along with two security officers. Their expressions are grave as they approach the door with purpose. Maeve watches their approach through the window, understanding now that Weston Albright's legacy is far more complex than a simple property deed. The quiet corner of a small-town diner has become the center of something much larger, something that began decades ago with a classified operation and her father's sacrifice. The Admiral knocks sharply on the door. The naval officer looks to Maeve questioningly. "What now?" she asks. Maeve takes a deep breath and stands. "Now we find out what Captain Albright really wanted me to know." Maeve moves to the door with measured steps, aware that whatever happens next will permanently alter the trajectory of her life. Snow has begun to fall again outside, individual flakes drifting past the windows like messengers from a distant place. The Admiral's reflection wavers in the glass as she approaches, his authoritative figure distorted by the early morning light. She unlocks the door, the familiar jingle of the bell marking this threshold between her old life and whatever comes next. Admiral Blackwood enters first, bringing with him the scent of cold air and military-issued cologne. His security detail follows, positioning themselves discreetly near the entrance, their trained eyes automatically scanning for threats even in this humble diner. "Ms. Calloway," the Admiral acknowledges with a formal nod. His gaze shifts to the naval officer standing by the corner booth. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I see you've made contact." "Yes, sir," the woman responds, her posture straightening almost imperceptibly. "We were just discussing Operation Stillwater." The Admiral's expression remains neutral, but something tightens around his eyes. A minuscule tell that most would miss, but Maeve has spent 15 years reading the subtle language of people's faces, the micro-expressions that reveal what words conceal. "I'd prefer to continue this conversation in private," he says, glancing meaningfully at the windows facing Main Street. Maeve gestures toward the diner's empty interior. "We are private, Admiral. The diner doesn't open for another hour." "These matters require more security than a public establishment can provide," he counters, authority evident in his tone. It's the voice of someone accustomed to compliance, to rooms falling silent when he speaks. Maeve doesn't move. The corner booth behind her feels like an anchor, grounding her in this moment of decision. This is where Captain Albright chose to leave his legacy. I think he had his reasons. The standoff stretches between them, neither willing to yield. Through the windows, early morning light catches the falling snow, transforming ordinary Meridian Crossing into something almost ethereal. The tableau feels suspended in time. Three people locked in a contest of wills that began decades before, in places Maeve has only heard named in news reports. Admiral Blackwood studies her for a long moment, reassessing. Something shifts in his demeanor, a subtle recalibration. "He said you'd be stubborn, said it was your father's best quality, too." "He never mentioned my father to me," Maeve says. "Not once in 3 years." "Because he was protecting you." The Admiral moves to the counter, motioning for his security officers to remain by the door. He removes his gloves with deliberate precision, folding them, before placing them in his pocket. "What did he tell you about Operation Stillwater?" "Nothing directly," Maeve admits, returning to where Lieutenant Commander Hayes waits. "Just what was hidden in the cranes?" She spreads several paper cranes on the counter between them. Each bears tiny notations along the folds, coordinates, dates, names written in a precise hand so small they are nearly invisible unless you know to look for them. When unfolded fully, the cranes reveal complex diagrams, tactical formations, equipment specifications, authorization codes. "Captain Albright documented everything," she continues. "Every operation, every decision, every consequence. He called it his insurance policy." The Admiral examines the cranes without touching them, his reflection visible in the polished counter beneath. "These should be turned over to the Department of Defense immediately. They contain highly classified information." "They contain the truth," Lieutenant Commander Hayes interjects, stepping forward. Her voice carries the conviction of someone who has discovered something that can't be unlearned. Truth that someone has gone to great lengths to bury. Admiral Blackwood's attention shifts to the younger officer. His tone sharpens. The command presence no longer subtle. Your assignment was to locate Albright's documentation and report back, Lieutenant Commander, not to draw conclusions about matters beyond your clearance level. My assignment came from Captain Albright himself, sir, Hayes responds, her posture rigid with tension. Before he died, he contacted me directly, said if anything happened to him, I should come here and find Maeve Calloway. The Admiral's expression darkens. Albright had no authority to issue such orders. He was retired. With respect, sir, his authority came from what he knew. Hayes places another paper crane on the counter. This one newer than the others, its paper still crisp, its folds sharp, including what really happened in Lahore last month. A heavy silence falls over the diner. Outside, Meridian Crossing begins to stir with morning activity. Delivery trucks making rounds, early commuters heading to jobs in neighboring towns, lights coming on in apartments above storefronts. Inside, 3 people stand frozen in a moment of decision, the weight of classified history hanging between them. How much do you know? The Admiral finally asks Maeve. Enough to understand why Captain Albright chose me, she answers, meeting his gaze directly. My father didn't die in a training accident. He died because he discovered something during Operation Kingfisher, something about unauthorized weapons sales to insurgent groups. When he reported it, he became a liability. That's classified information, the Admiral says quietly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. That's the truth, Maeve corrects. The truth Weston documented and protected for decades. The truth he wanted preserved after he was gone. The Admiral's composure slips just slightly. A muscle twitches in his jaw, his hands resting on the counter, tense momentarily. These allegations, if made public, would damage national security. Careers would be destroyed, trust in our institutions undermined. Perhaps some institutions should be undermined, Hayes suggests, her idealism evident in the conviction with which she speaks. That's enough, Lieutenant Commander, he snaps. Maeve moves behind the counter, to the coffee machine that has been her domain for 15 years. With practiced movements, she begins brewing a fresh pot. The familiar ritual seems incongruous with the tension filling the room, yet somehow perfectly aligned with the strategy Weston employed for years. Normalcy as cover, ordinary actions concealing extraordinary purpose. Captain Albright came here every day for 3 years, she says, as the coffee begins to drip, the rich aroma filling the space between them. He could have taken his information to journalists, to Congress, to foreign governments. Instead, he sat in that corner booth and watched this town, watched me. She pours 3 cups, sliding them across the counter. The Admiral leaves his untouched, but Hayes wraps her hands around the mug, seeking warmth. He wasn't hiding, Admiral. He was deciding. Deciding what? The Admiral asks, his fingers resting near but not touching his cup. Whether the system he served could be redeemed or if it needed to be exposed. Maeve lifts her cup, the steam rising between them like a veil. I think he was waiting to see which way the wind would blow after he was gone. Admiral Blackwood looks toward the security officers by the door, then back to Maeve. The calculation is visible in his eyes, assessing threats, weighing options, considering contingencies. She wonders how many similar calculations he's made throughout his career. How many lives have hinged on his decisions? What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Calloway? A compromise, she replies, one that honors what Captain Albright stood for while protecting what deserves protection. I'm listening. Before Maeve can elaborate, the bell above the door chimes. Landry enters, stomping snow from his boots before looking up and stopping abruptly at the sight of the military personnel. His scarf is wrapped twice around his neck, his thinning hair dampened by melting snowflakes. Sorry, I didn't realize we had company, he says, confusion evident in his expression, as he takes in the tableau, Maeve behind the counter, the Admiral and Lieutenant Commander at attention, security personnel flanking the door. It's fine, Landry, Maeve assures him. We're just having a discussion about Captain Albright's legacy. Landry glances between the Admiral and the security officers, reading the tension in the room. Should I come back later? No, actually, your timing is perfect, Maeve says. We're going to need to make some changes to the diner's operating procedures, starting today. As Landry joins them at the counter, removing his coat and scarf, Maeve outlines a plan that bridges 2 seemingly incompatible worlds, the clandestine realm of military intelligence and the transparent community of a small-town diner. Her proposal is elegant in its simplicity. The classified information Albright gathered will remain protected, but it will be reviewed by a balanced committee with representatives from both military and civilian oversight groups. The diner itself will serve as cover for this operation, its basement converted into a secure facility where the documents can be examined without drawing attention. The corner booth remains reserved for active military, she explains, but some of those personnel will be part of the security detail for the operation below. By the time the first regular customers begin arriving, a framework has been established. The Admiral, initially skeptical, gradually warms to the concept as Maeve addresses his concerns with practical solutions. Lieutenant Commander Hayes contributes technical expertise, suggesting protocols for secure communication and document handling. Landry listens with growing amazement as his diner is transformed into something far more complex than a simple eatery. So, we'll be running a normal restaurant upstairs while a classified operation happens below? He asks, still processing this new reality. Hiding in plain sight, Maeve confirms, just like Weston did. The compromise satisfies all parties. The Admiral retains control over classified information while ensuring proper oversight. Hayes gets her investigation into Operation Stillwater without risking broader exposure. Maeve honors Weston's legacy while protecting both national security and the public's right to accountability. As they finalize details, the diner begins to fill with regular customers. The Admiral and his security team depart discreetly through the back entrance while Hayes remains, taking a seat at the counter and ordering breakfast like any other patron. The day passes in a blur of activity. Maeve moves through her familiar routines, serving coffee, taking orders, managing the flow of the dining room, while her mind processes the enormous changes happening beneath the surface. Occasionally, she catches Hayes watching her, with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "You're good at this," the lieutenant commander observes during a quiet moment. "The double life. Most people couldn't handle the compartmentalization." Maeve shrugs slightly. "I've been keeping secrets for 15 years, just different ones." 2 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Maeve unlocks the diner's front door at precisely 4:47 a.m. The familiar routine grounds her as she prepares for what promises to be an extraordinary day. Winter has finally released its grip on Meridian Crossing. Crocuses push through the soil in planters along Main Street. The morning air carries the scent of damp earth and possibility. Maeve breathes deeply as she enters the diner, appreciating this moment of calm before the day's events unfold. The interior has undergone subtle changes since that fateful morning. The counter remains, as do most of the booths, but the back wall now features photographs of service members from Meridian Crossing throughout the decades. At the center is a formal portrait of Captain Weston Albright in his dress uniform, his expression serious but with the faint suggestion of a smile at the corners of his mouth. The corner booth has been slightly modified. A small brass plaque now identifies it as the Captain's Table, reserved for active military personnel. Beside it, a frame case displays Admiral Blackwood's SEAL Trident, permanently retired in Albright's honor. Below the diner, invisible to casual observers, the basement has been transformed into a secure facility. Behind reinforced doors and sophisticated security systems, a small team works daily, reviewing the documentation Captain Albright compiled throughout his career. The paper cranes, carefully unfolded and preserved, have already revealed evidence of operations conducted without proper authorization, funds diverted to unauthorized activities, and in some cases, deliberate falsification of reports to conceal wrongdoing. By 9 a.m., vehicles begin arriving, military transports, government cars, and the personal vehicles of Meridian Crossing residents. The street outside fills with people gathering for the official dedication of what is now formally named Albright's Corner, a place of honor. Inside, final preparations are underway. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, now a regular presence at the diner, arranges chairs in neat rows facing the corner booth. Her initial investigation has expanded into a full review of multiple operations, with findings that have already led to several quiet resignations at the Pentagon. Landry, recently promoted to general manager, directs a small team of new staff members as they prepare refreshments. His initial skepticism about the diner's dual purpose has transformed into pride at being part of something significant. though he still occasionally shakes his head in wonder at the turn his life has taken. Maeve moves through the space with quiet authority, her role transformed from employee to owner, from observer to guardian of a legacy larger than anyone in Meridian Crossing had imagined. The weight of responsibility sits differently on her shoulders now, not a burden, but a purpose, a continuation of both her father's work and Weston's vigilance. At 10 a.m. precisely, Admiral Blackwood arrives with his entourage. Following him are several high-ranking officials from various military branches, members of Congress, and representatives from the Department of Defense. They file in solemnly, taking seats in the front rows. Behind them come the residents of Meridian Crossing, filling every available space. Sorrel Vega, subdued since the revelations about Captain Albright, sits near the back, her designer outfit more understated than her usual fare. The mayor and town council members position themselves prominently, eager to associate with the day's proceedings. When everyone is seated, Admiral Blackwood approaches the small podium that has been set up near the corner booth. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to honor not just a man, but an ideal. Captain Weston Albright dedicated his life to protecting his country, often in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged. In his final years, he found in this small establishment something worth protecting in a different way, the simple dignity of being treated as a human being rather than a rank or a record. The Admiral gestures toward Maeve, who stands beside the corner booth. Ms. Calloway embodied that dignity without knowing who sat before her each day. In doing so, she reminded a decorated officer of why his service mattered in the first place. He continues, explaining the dual purpose of the newly established Albright's Corner. This establishment will continue as a community gathering place, open to all, but it will also serve another function. The captain's table will remain reserved for active service members, a place where they can find the same quiet respect Captain Albright valued so deeply. What the Admiral doesn't mention, what only a small circle of individuals knows, is the diner's third function. The Oversight Committee working in the basement has already identified several operations requiring further investigation, including Operation Stillwater. Their work proceeds methodically, balancing national security concerns with the need for accountability. Admiral Blackwood concludes his remarks and introduces several other speakers, a representative from the governor's office, the mayor of Meridian Crossing, and finally, Maeve herself. She approaches the podium with the same quiet dignity that characterized her years of service at the diner. The room falls silent as she surveys the gathered crowd, faces turned toward her with an attention she once would have found uncomfortable. Now, she accepts it as part of her new role. 3 years ago, she begins, a man walked into this diner and sat in that corner booth. He ordered coffee, drank it slowly, and left. He repeated this ritual every day, saying very little, observing everything. Many of you know now that he was Captain Weston Albright, a decorated officer with a distinguished career. She pauses, letting her gaze move across the familiar faces of regular customers, many of whom had dismissed or ignored Weston during his daily visits. But that wasn't who sat in that booth each morning. That was just his history. Who he was in those moments was simply a man seeking a quiet place to be treated like anyone else. In honoring that simple desire, I apparently honored everything he stood for. Maeve gestures to the photograph on the wall. Captain Albright left us more than a building or a legacy. He left us a reminder that dignity isn't earned through rank or accomplishment. It's the birthright of every person who walks through these doors. She turns to the corner booth. This table will always remain open to those who serve. Their coffee will always be free. But the true tribute to Captain Albright isn't in this gesture. It's in how we treat every person who enters, with the same respect, regardless of their status or circumstance. Her words resonate through the room, drawing nods of agreement from veterans and civilians alike. Even Sorrel seems moved, though she studies her hands to hide it. As Maeve concludes her remarks, a young military officer enters the diner. He stands at attention briefly before approaching the podium. His uniform is immaculate, his bearing formal, but his eyes carry warmth. Ms. Calloway, he says formally, on behalf of the Joint Special Operations Command, I present this token of our esteem. He hands her a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on blue velvet, is a medallion bearing the insignias of various special operations units arranged in a circle. At the center is an engraving of a paper crane. This has been authorized as an official commendation, the officer explains. It recognizes civilians who provide extraordinary support to special operations personnel. You are the first recipient. Maeve accepts the medallion with visible emotion, the weight of it in her palm, a tangible connection to both Weston and her father. As the ceremony concludes and the formal portion of the day transitions to a community gathering, she finds a moment of solitude at the counter. Lieutenant Commander Hayes joins her, coffee mug in hand. The committee reviewed the Lahore documentation this morning. Hayes informs her quietly, her voice pitched to avoid being overheard. 3 officials have been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Maeve nods, watching as residents of Meridian Crossing mingle with military personnel. The artificial barriers between them temporarily dissolved. Children dart between groups, fascinated by uniforms and medals. Veterans who normally keep to themselves engage in conversation, sharing stories rarely told. And the agents who were monitoring the diner all those years, she asks. Reassigned, Hayes confirms, though 2 ask specifically to remain in the rotation for the new security detail. The security detail is yet another aspect of Albright's legacy, a rotating presence of intelligence officers who take shifts at the corner booth, maintaining the appearance of ordinary customers while serving as the first line of protection for the classified operation below. He planned all of this, didn't he? Maeve asks. From the moment he first walked in. Hayes smiles slightly, stirring her coffee. Captain Albright was known for his long-term strategic thinking, but I don't think even he anticipated how perfectly his plan would unfold through you. As the day progresses, the crowd slowly thins. Military officials return to their duties. Townspeople drift back to their daily routines. Children grow restless and are led home by parents. By late afternoon, the diner returns to something resembling normal operations, though with the new awareness of its dual purpose humming beneath the surface. Maeve works alongside her staff, serving coffee, taking orders, cleaning tables. To casual observers, she appears unchanged, the same efficient, observant presence she's always been. Only those who know her well might notice the slight difference in her bearing, the new certainty in her movements. At closing time, after the last customer has departed and the staff has gone home, Maeve sits alone in the corner booth. She traces the edge of the table with her fingertips, feeling the smooth wood worn by years of use. From this vantage point, she can see both entrances, just as Weston did each morning for 3 years. The bell above the door chimes softly. Admiral Blackwood enters, now in civilian clothes rather than his dress uniform. Without the formal attire, he seems more human somehow, still commanding, but accessible in a way he wasn't before. I thought I might find you here, he says, sliding into the seat across from her, the seat where she had placed the second mug on that fateful morning. Long day, Maeve observes. Important day, he corrects. The beginning of something significant. She studies him with the same careful attention she once directed at Weston. You were his friend. For 40 years, the Admiral confirms, though there were times we found ourselves on opposite sides of certain decisions. Like Operation Stillwater. He nods, his expression grave. Weston believed in accountability above all, even when it was inconvenient, especially then. Is that why he documented everything, as insurance? Partly, Admiral Blackwood acknowledges, but also because he believed that someday someone would need to understand the full context of decisions made in shadows. History doesn't judge fairly without all the facts. Maeve considers this. And now that responsibility falls to the committee. With your oversight, he reminds her. That was the compromise. Military expertise balanced by civilian conscience. Weston's conscience channeled through you. She glances toward the photograph on the wall, Captain Albright's serious expression now familiar in a way it never was during his living visits. I still don't fully understand why he chose me. Because of my father? That was part of it, the Admiral admits. But Weston could have approached you directly at any time about your father's legacy. He chose to observe first, to determine if you were the right person regardless of your lineage. And what did he observe that convinced him? Admiral Blackwood, or smiles slightly. He told me once that he watched you intercept Sorrel Vega as she was about to confront a homeless man who'd come in just to warm up. You poured him coffee, put it on your tab, and positioned yourself between him and Sorrel until she gave up and left. Maeve remembers the incident, though it seemed unremarkable at the time. Common decency isn't exactly a qualification for what he was planning, but it is exactly the foundation he wanted, the Admiral counters. Technical skills can be taught. Integrity is either present or it isn't. He needed someone who would instinctively protect the vulnerable while holding the powerful accountable. He stands, preparing to leave. The committee meets again tomorrow at 0900. Lieutenant Commander Hayes will brief you on the agenda beforehand. As he reaches the door, he pauses. Weston left one more thing for you. Said to give it to you once everything was in place. From his pocket, he produces a final paper crane, more elaborately folded than the others, its paper whiter, newer. He made this one the day before he died. After the Admiral departs, Maeve remains in the corner booth, the unfolded crane before her. Unlike the others, this one contains no coordinates, no operational details, no names of agents or targets. Instead, in the same precise handwriting is a simple message. The corner exists to see both entrances. Never forget to watch the doors. 6 months later, Albright's corner has settled into its new dual identity. On the surface, it operates as the town's favorite gathering place, serving comfort food and coffee to locals and an increasing number of visitors drawn by the story of Captain Albright and the waitress who honored him without knowing who he was. The diner itself has undergone subtle renovations, new booths, updated kitchen equipment, a fresh coat of paint, but its essential character remains unchanged. The same Formica countertops, the same vinyl seats, the same unpretentious menu. Maeve has resisted suggestions to upscale the establishment, maintaining that its accessibility to all was part of what Weston valued. The captain's table remains reserved for active military personnel. Their coffee is always free, covered by a fund established in Weston's name. Some come alone, sitting silently as he once did. Others arrive in small groups, speaking in low voices about deployments and homecomings. A few become regulars, finding in the corner booth the same respite Weston sought. Below, the classified review continues. The committee meets weekly, methodically working through decades of documentation. Their work has already led to several quiet resignations, 3 formal investigations, and in one case, long overdue recognition for a team whose mission had been deliberately erased from official records. The operation maintains its cover effectively. Most residents of Meridian Crossing have forgotten the excitement of the dedication ceremony, accepting the diner's new name and the reserved booth as simply part of local color. Tourists occasionally ask about the story behind Albright's corner, receiving a carefully edited version that omits classified details. Sorrel Vega still comes for breakfast each morning, though she sits at the counter now, rather than demanding a prime table. Her manner has softened, her criticism of undesirables notably absent from town council meetings. The bench across from the diner remains in place, now featuring a small plaque commemorating Captain Albright's service. On this particular morning, Maeve arrives at 4:47 a.m. as always. The routine remains unchanged, coffee prepared, counters cleaned, menus arranged. When she places the mug in the corner booth, she pauses briefly, acknowledging the weight of habit and memory. The bell above the door chimes, surprising her. No one usually arrives this early, not even the regular security detail. She turns, coffee pot in hand, to greet the unexpected visitor. A young officer enters, clearly exhausted from a long journey. His uniform bears the dust of recent deployment, his eyes the haunted look of someone who has seen too much. His right hand trembles slightly as he removes his cap. "We're not open yet," Maeve says automatically, then reconsiders. "But I can get you some coffee." The officer approaches slowly, his gaze moving from the photograph on the wall to the corner booth, and finally to Maeve herself. "Captain Albright suggested I might find some peace here." She studies him carefully. "You knew him?" "He was my first commander," the officer explains. "Before he retired, he kept in touch. When things went sideways on my last deployment, his voice was the one I heard in my head." Maeve gestures to the corner booth. "Then you should sit there." As the young officer settles into Weston's spot, Maeve brings coffee in the special mug reserved for that table. She places Admiral Blackwood's trident pin on the table between them, a ritual she performs for first-time visitors to the captain's table. "First cup's always on the house," she says, "for those who serve in silence." The officer wraps his hands around the mug, and Maeve notices the slight tremor, the same trembling she had observed in Weston's hands each morning. She turns away, giving him the privacy he needs for this moment of vulnerability. Some wounds are visible only in such small betrayals of control. When she returns a few minutes later, the trembling has stopped. The officer looks up with clearer eyes. "He said you'd understand without needing explanations." "Understanding isn't always about knowing details," Maeve replies. "Sometimes it's just about recognizing what matters." They fall into comfortable silence as morning light begins to filter through the windows. Outside, Meridian Crossing awakens to another day, transformed by the revelation that greatness had passed quietly among them for years, unrecognized except by one woman who offered simple dignity to a silent visitor. Inside, at the corner booth where a ghost once sat, light falls on two coffee mugs, one held by a young officer carrying forward a legacy, the other placed with precision by a waitress who found her purpose in an act of quiet respect. On the wall behind them, Captain Albright watches over the scene, his photograph positioned to view both entrances. Beneath it, the small brass plaque bears his final message to those who would continue his work. The measure of a life is not in the acclaim it receives, but in the impact it leaves on the hearts of others. And as the diner fills with the day's first regular customers, Maeve moves between tables with the same efficient grace that has characterized her service for years. But now, there's an added dimension to her vigilance. She watches the doors, just as Weston instructed. She notices who enters, who lingers, who observes more than participates. Lieutenant Commander Hayes arrives for her morning coffee, taking her usual seat at the counter. They exchange a nod of greeting, a silent acknowledgement of the work that continues beneath their feet. The committee's findings have begun to create ripples in certain circles of power, subtle at first, but growing. Across the street, where the bench once faced removal by Sorrell's Beautification Committee, a small memorial now stands. Bronze figures of a soldier and a civilian sit side by side, their features generalized but their posture unmistakable. The straight-backed alertness of military bearing beside the open, receptive stance of welcome. Between them, a paper crane rests in bronze perpetuity, its wings partially unfolded to reveal nothing but blank space. A reminder that some stories remain untold, some service unacknowledged, some heroism known only through its quiet impact on the lives of others. And in the corner booth of what was once Hemlock Diner, a tradition continues. One cup of coffee offered without expectation, one moment of peace provided without question, one small act of respect that honors not the rank or the record, but the humanity of those who serve in silence. As the morning progresses, Maeve refills the young officer's cup. His hands no longer shake. His shoulders have relaxed incrementally. Whatever burden he carried through the door has lightened, if only temporarily. In this, Maeve recognizes Weston's true legacy, not the classified documents or the oversight committee, but this moment of connection, of dignity preserved in a world that too often diminishes it. She moves through the diner, attending to other customers, but her awareness remains anchored to the corner booth, to the officer sitting where Weston once sat, to the mission that continues in ways both visible and hidden, to the promise made to a man who saw in her something worth trusting with his most precious possession, the truth. Outside, snow begins to fall again, individual flakes drifting past the windows like messengers from a distant place. The cycle of seasons continues, Meridian Crossing endures, and in the corner booth of Albright's Corner, a legacy of quiet service lives on, one cup of coffee at a time.